First of all, thank you for the invitation to provide this keynote address to the Arctic Observing Summit 2020 gathering. Before I begin, I'd like to make some comments about the COVID-19. I understand the need to hold this gathering in a virtual fashion, but I must also acknowledge that this format creates extraordinary barriers for more Inuit to participate directly. For the Inuit Circumpolar Council, we've taken steps to minimize impact on our organization and our offices. Yet we remain concerned about our communities, which are at a much higher risk of exposure due to the chronic lack of basic infrastructure, including the lack of sewer and running water. The spread of COVID-19 highlights the urgent need to remedy the profound infrastructure deficit throughout Inuit Nunat, which contributes to vulnerability and underlies the health challenges experienced by too many of our people. Inuit communities have historically experienced devastating loss of life due to lack of immunity to preventable diseases such as diphtheria, influenza, and tuberculosis. The basic conditions that contributed to vulnerability in the past continue to exist today in many of our communities, contributing to the higher prevalence of lethal diseases and greater susceptibility to other viruses. We hope that you'll join us in our call upon governments to close the infrastructure gaps throughout Inuit Nunat through major new investments in our communities, prioritizing basic infrastructure such as housing, water, and sewer. This is really the only way to create social and economic equity, support population health, and reduce vulnerability to virus and disease. In the meantime, I truly hope that your respective families and communities are all well, safe, and COVID-19 free. And now for my presentation. As Inuit, the Arctic is our homeland. We have been observing the Arctic and all living things in this distinct environment for millennia. We are a network. We're distinct Indigenous peoples with blood and familial relations across thousands of miles that transcend imposed international borders from Chukotka in the Russian Federation to the east coast of Kalaalleq Nunaat, or Greenland. Because of this reality, I am pleased to provide some brief comments on the summit topic of observations and how we can achieve meaningful action. I will highlight crucial dimensions of our way of life that must inform your work and the dramatic change that the Earth is undergoing, and specifically in the Arctic region. In these remarks, I will comment upon our perspective of the so-called Arctic system, Indigenous knowledge and the ongoing challenge of its utilization, the co-production of knowledge, the important links between your observational priorities and Inuit food security, and conclude with remarks on bridging or linking research. My key message is the need to drive shifts in observational priorities toward the multifaceted, interrelated nature of the essential dynamics of Inuit observations, knowledge, and food security, or essentially our overall cultural integrity. 43 years ago, in June of 1977, the late founder of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, Eben Hobson, in welcoming delegates to our organizing conference, stated, "Our language contains the memory of 4,000 years of human survival through the conservation and good managing of our Arctic wealth. Our language contains the intricate knowledge of the ice that we have seen no others demonstrate. Without our central involvement, there can be no safe and responsible Arctic resource development." My background is in public international law, and specifically human rights law. As such, I know that a key characteristic of human rights is that they are interrelated, interdependent, and indivisible. This characteristic is a key dimension of our worldview as Inuit. At the same 1977 organizing conference, Inupiaq delegate Charles Eduk Edwardson, speaking about the proposed International Whaling Commission ban on Aboriginal whaling, stated that the people who have called themselves conservationists have chosen not to conserve the Eskimos. We are further compelled to tell the world who we are. The total depth of our environment and our association with the whale is dependent upon the survival of both communities, the whale as a species and Inuit as a species. In the mid-1980s, the ICC began the drafting of principles and elements for a comprehensive Arctic policy, which affirmed that Inuit are an integral part of the Arctic ecosystems. For generations, Inuit subsistence activities have been and continue to be in harmony with and an important part of the dynamic processes of Arctic ecosystems. The profound relationship between Inuit and other living species of the natural world has economic, social, cultural, and spiritual dimensions. These perspectives of Inuit and ties with nature must be fully recognized and integrated in resource management and conservation strategies pertaining to the Arctic. Inuit, as a species, are interrelated, interdependent, interconnected with, and indivisible from the world around them. Inuit hold a holistic perspective about their place in the world. The polar bears, seals, walrus, char, bowhead whales, belugas, salmon, and all other species are intimately interconnected and understood by reference to the whole way of life of an Inuk and her or his community and environment. Turning to Indigenous knowledge, for over 4 decades, Inuit have emphasized the importance of our knowledge about the Arctic environment. Eben Hobson's quote is but one example. Among other provisions, we were instrumental in raising this matter in the negotiation and finalization of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, adopted by the General Assembly on September 13, 2007. Article 31 of the UN Declaration addresses our knowledge and the right to safeguard and promote Indigenous knowledge. Today, the ICC offers the following definition. Indigenous knowledge is a systematic way of thinking applied to phenomena across biological, physical, cultural, and spiritual systems. It includes insights based on evidence acquired through direct and long-term experiences and extensive and multi-generational observations, lessons, and skills. It has developed over millennia and is still developing in a living process, including knowledge acquired today and in the future, and it is passed on from generation to generation. Too often, Inuit and their wealth of knowledge are sidelined. Though the ICC is one of the first permanent participants of the Arctic Council, we continue to face the challenge of gaining respect for the legitimacy of our knowledge. However, this has prompted important exercises of self-determination in research and monitoring. For example, in Canada, the Inuit Academy has developed a national Inuit strategy on research and advocated for federal funding to be provided directly to Inuit organizations to conduct research that they deem necessary. For example, the National Inuit Health Survey. Furthermore, in Alaska and Canada, myself and 2 other principal investigators are concluding a National Science Foundation funded project reliant upon a methodology constructed on the pillar of Indigenous knowledge addressing food sovereignty and self-governance. Indigenous knowledge goes beyond observations and ecological knowledge. offering a unique way of knowing and includes multiple observations within the same environment. Yet there is a persistent need to gain respect for and recognition of Indigenous knowledge and to utilize both Indigenous and scientific knowledge. Both ways of knowing will benefit the people, land, water, air, and animals of the Arctic. Regarding co-production of knowledge, because of our past challenges to achieve co-production of knowledge, the matter was also addressed in our Arctic Policy Principles and specifically provides that Inuit traditional knowledge and scientific research are both valid systems of knowledge that should be integrated and harmonized within the context of cooperative research. In light of increased resource development and environmental degradation, resource managers must have access to the best possible information relating to terrestrial and marine ecosystems on which to base their decisions. Furthermore, to overcome this persistent challenge within the Arctic Council, the ICC, along with other permanent participant representatives, affirmed in the Ottawa Indigenous Knowledge Principles that Indigenous knowledge and science are different yet complementary systems and sources of knowledge, and when appropriately used together, may generate new knowledge and may inform decision-making, policy development, and the work of the Arctic Council. The co-production of knowledge and the reality of the depth of accumulated Inuit knowledge, observations, and monitoring about the Arctic environment has application to broader scale scientific research and should not be treated as only relevant to local conditions. There are important connections to broader scale scientific research. Indigenous knowledge must be recognized as valuable beyond how it may advance non-Indigenous scientific objectives. Indigenous knowledge must stand and be respected on its own. Too often, scientists attempt to fit Indigenous knowledge into their objectives. However, one should never attempt to translate Indigenous knowledge into science. Regarding monitoring, the Atlas of Community-Based Monitoring and Indigenous Knowledge in a Changing Arctic, which is available online, illustrates the many local and regional monitoring activities in the circumpolar Arctic. It is an important way to highlight monitoring being done regionally and locally, which is currently not recognized or utilized to its full potential on larger scales. Such initiatives and activities could have extraordinary impacts on national or global scales, but the connections are currently lacking. There are multiple benefits for broader scale understanding, as well as the ecosystem-based and holistic approaches being advanced by Inuit and other Arctic Indigenous peoples. For example, local Arctic data is crucial for the global UN agreement entitled Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. Data from the Arctic demonstrates how contaminants move to a region where they are not produced or used. These contaminants bioaccumulate in the environment and directly impact the health of Inuit, whose current vitality and future rely upon food harvested from the lands and the coastal seas. This global transport of contaminants and the health concerns associated with it was the reason for the negotiation of the convention. Similar reasons led to the more recent adoption of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. Both international treaties highlight the vulnerability of Arctic ecosystems and Arctic Indigenous peoples. The adverse impacts of these pollutants upon our people, our territories, and our way of life was the rationale for the active and direct role of the Inuit Circumpolar Council in these negotiations. Furthermore, I'm glad to note the recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Special Report on Oceans and the Cryosphere, and the specific reference to Indigenous peoples and the importance and the value of Indigenous knowledge. However, what science continues to miss are the intersections that must be made in relation to different factors impacting us in the Arctic and globally. For example, to reveal the links between the interconnectedness of issues such as climate change, biodiversity, and contaminants. The way that we Inuit see the environment does not separate these different effects and impacts. It is all connected, and we can only solve these problems if we address them in a holistic manner. Our food security is a unique element of who we are as a people. The interrelated nature of our ecosystems become clear when we consider our food security. There is no question that every action that you take concerning observational priorities is intimately tied to Inuit food security. For this reason, it is essential to ask, what are you monitoring for? Why and where? What is the purpose? How is it being done? These questions should not solely be a matter of scientific monitoring. In fact, because of our profound relationship with the environment, scientists can benefit from Inuit monitoring and observations at both the local and regional level, with results that are mutually beneficial. For Inuit, food security is the natural right of all Inuit to be part of the ecosystem, to access food, and to caretake, protect, and respect all of life, land, water, and air. It allows for all Inuit to obtain, process, store, and consume sufficient amounts of healthy, nutritious, and preferred food. Foods Inuit physically and spiritually crave and need from the land, air, and water. Food provides for families and future generations through the practice of Inuit customs and spirituality, languages, knowledge, policies, management practices, and self-governance. Food security also includes the responsibility and ability to pass on knowledge to younger generations, the taste of traditional foods rooted in place and season, knowledge of how to safely obtain and prepare traditional foods for medicinal use, clothing, housing, nutrients, and overall, how to be within one's environment. It means understanding that food is a lifeline and a connection between the past and today's self and cultural identity. Inuit food security is characterized by environmental health and is made up of 6 interconnecting dimensions: availability, Inuit culture, decision-making power and management, health and wellness, stability, and accessibility. This definition holds the understanding that without food sovereignty, food security will not exist. In conclusion, it is imperative that all future Arctic observations and monitoring consider our perspectives of the Arctic, the whole system, and what it means to us as the inhabitants of the region. I urge all of you to think of ways in which you can outreach to those within our communities, and especially our knowledge holders, in a meaningful fashion, and consider the ethical utilization of Indigenous knowledge in your work. Recognize that the co-production of knowledge can enrich the results, creating relevant impact for Inuit, the human beings that call the Arctic system their home. Also, seriously consider how you can bridge the scales from the local Inuit community or region to the national and global levels. Meaningful participation requires that our engagement must take place from beginning to end, at every phase and throughout every step of a project. Also, for your monitoring and observation work to have an impact, the information gathered must be usable and accessible, as well as relevant to Inuit as both users and decision makers. Think of innovative and creative ways in which you can support and promote circumpolar community-based monitoring and observation activities, again, with a full and meaningful engagement of Inuit. Of course, one must tangle with the questions of data and its availability, as well as questions of confidentiality and other ethics, especially in the use of Indigenous knowledge. However, the capacity of individual knowledge holders is a good first source. Your efforts will likely yield questions about capacity, but do not be deterred. Indeed, you may become a contributor to building capacity through improving your own capacity, educating yourself by choosing to tackle these questions and overcoming the challenges that we have faced for decades. If you achieve these goals, you will be contributing to the co-production of knowledge in a way that may have extraordinary impact and again, enrich your results to the mutual benefit of Inuit and all others. Remember that your observation priority or priorities, whether it is sea ice, changes in the water columns, migration routes of certain species, etc., they're all interrelated with our desire for food security now and well into the future. Too often, parallel objectives are being pursued, but they never manage to intersect. With your imagination and the deep pool of knowledge held by my people, the Inuit, we can ensure that intersections can be made that will ultimately benefit all of humankind. Thank you for your attention.